Now, breaking news from KARE 11.
Against Vance Boelter for his horrific attack on our state and our elected representatives. Political assassinations are rare. They strike at the very core of our democracy. But the details of Boelter's crime are even worse. They are truly chilling. It is no exaggeration to say that his crimes are the stuff of nightmares. Boelter stalked his victims like prey. He went to their homes, held them out as a police officer, and shot them in cold blood. Now, there's been a lot of information and misinformation out there about Boelter's crimes. We have filed a detailed 20-page complaint and affidavit that sets forth what happened in this case. I'd like to share some of that information with you now. In the early morning hours of June 14th, Boelter went to the homes of 4 Minnesota state politicians with the intent to kill them. Boelter first traveled to the home of Minnesota State Senator John Hortman in Champlin, Minnesota. Boelter arrived at the senator's home disguised as a police officer. He arrived in a black SUV with emergency lights turned on and with a license plate that read police. Boelter wore a black tactical vest and body armor. He carried a flashlight and a Beretta 9mm handgun. He also wore a hyper-realistic silicone mask. Senator Hortman had a security camera. I've seen the footage from that camera, and it is chilling. Boelter knocked on Senator Hortman's front door and repeatedly shouted, "This is the police, open the door." Senator Hortman and his wife, Yvette, came to the door. When they opened the door, Boelter shined the flashlight in their faces and said there had been a shooting reported in the house. Boelter asked if they had any weapons. When Boelter lowered his flashlight, which he had shined in their face, they realized that he was not a police officer. They shouted out, "You're not a cop. You're not a police officer." Boelter then announced, "This is a robbery," and forced himself into their home. When Senator Hortman attempted to push Boelter out and stop him from entering his home, Boelter shot him repeatedly. Boelter then shot Miss Hortman repeatedly. Boelter fled the scene, and the Hortman's daughter called 911. Unfortunately, the Hortmans survived, although they remain hospitalized. After shooting Senator Hortman and his wife, Boelter traveled to the home of another Minnesota state representative in Maple Grove, Minnesota. Video surveillance showed that Boelter rang the doorbell at the state representative's house at approximately 2:24 a.m. on Friday night. Again, he was dressed as a law enforcement officer, wearing a tactical vest and body armor, carrying a handgun and a flashlight, and wearing that same hyper-realistic silicone mask. Again, the images, as you can see on the screen, are haunting. Now, fortunately, the state representative was not home. She and her family were gone on vacation, and so Boelter left. Boelter then traveled to the home of a Minnesota state senator who lived in New Hope, Minnesota. He parked in the street in that same black SUV with the police license plate. At about 2:36 a.m. on Friday night, after learning of the shooting of Senator Hortman, New Hope police dispatched an officer to conduct a wellness check on the state senator who lived in New Hope. When the New Hope officer arrived at the scene, she saw Boelter's black SUV parked down the block with the lights on. The New Hope police officer believed that Boelter was a police officer who had been dispatched to the scene to check on the status of the state senator. The New Hope police officer pulled up next to Boelter in his car, rolled down her window, and attempted to speak with him. Boelter did not respond. According to the officer, he just sat there and stared straight ahead. So the New Hope police officer, who had been dispatched to the scene, proceeded to the state senator's home. and she waited for other law enforcement to arrive. When they did, by the time they did, Boelter had left the scene. Boelter then traveled to Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, and the home of Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman. At approximately 3:30 a.m., Boelter arrived at Representative Hortman's house in his black SUV with the police license plates. He parked in the driveway and left the emergency lights on his SUV flashing, as if he was a police officer. Boelter approached Representative Hortman's home, again dressed as a police officer, wearing the tactical vest and body armor, and wearing that hyper-realistic mask. He was armed and carrying a flashlight. Before he entered the home, 2 Brooklyn Park police officers arrived at the scene. They too had been dispatched to check on Representative Hortman after learning of the shooting of Senator Hoffman. When they arrived at the scene, they saw Boelter's black SUV parked in the driveway with the emergency lights flashing, and they saw Boelter standing in front of the house several feet from the door. When Boelter saw the officers get out of the car, he drew his weapon and began firing. He rushed into the house through the front door, firing into it. He repeatedly fired into the house, and when he entered, he murdered Representative Hortman and her husband, Mark. The Brooklyn Park police officers fired at Boelter as he rushed into the home, but he escaped into the home and out the back. Officers recovered Boelter's 9mm Beretta, along with the body armor and the mask, behind the home along his path of flight when he fled on foot. They later searched Boelter's car, where they found 5 more firearms, including assault-style rifles and a large quantity of ammunition. Boelter also had in his car notebooks containing a list of more than 45 Minnesota state and federal elected officials, including Representative Hortman. Now, Boelter planned his attack carefully. He researched his victims and their families. He used the internet and other tools to find their addresses and names, the names of their family members. He conducted surveillance of their homes and took notes about the location of their homes. He also prepared in other ways. He concealed himself as a police officer, outfitting his black SUV with police lights and a police license plate, wearing a black tactical vest and body armor, carrying a police flashlight and a handgun. And of course, he wore that hyper-realistic silicone mask as seen on the surveillance videos. The video of his arrival and shooting of Senator Hoffman is truly chilling. Again, it's no exaggeration to say this is the stuff of nightmares. There's a photo of the firearms found in Boelter's abandoned SUV. Based on these crimes, we brought a federal complaint charging Boelter with an array of federal charges. Counts 1 and 2 charge him with stalking. Count 1 charges him with stalking Representative Melissa Hortman using interstate facilities, and that's Title 18, United States Code 2261. The statutory penalties there are life in prison. Count 2, similarly, charges him with stalking State Senator John Hoffman using interstate facilities. The maximum penalty of that count is 20 years in prison. Counts 3 and 4 charge Boelter with the murder of Melissa and of the Hortmans using a firearm in violation of 18 U.S.C. 924J. And these are punishable by a term of life imprisonment or even death. And counts 5 and 6 charge him with shooting the Hortmans and the Hoffmans using a firearm, and both of those counts also carry a maximum sentence of life in prison. Now, before I finish my remarks, I want to say a little bit about law enforcement and the manhunt that we've heard about the last 2 days. Over the past 48 hours, federal, state, and local law enforcement from throughout the state of Minnesota have worked together to carry out the largest manhunt in Minnesota history. Now, a lot has been said about law enforcement in recent weeks, but make no mistake, the men and women of our federal, state, and local law enforcement put their lives at risk and on the line to keep Minnesota safe. They work tirelessly, day and night, to make sure that the tragic events of Friday night ended without further violence or bloodshed. We owe them all a debt of gratitude, and they will forever have my respect and admiration. I'm going to turn it over to Special Agent Alvin Winston from the FBI.
Thanks, Joe. Good morning. My name is Alvin Winston, and I serve as the Special Agent in charge of the FBI Minneapolis Field Office, which covers the states of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. I want to begin by extending my deepest condolences to the families of the victims and to the community that has been shaken by this devastating act of violence. Our thoughts remain with those who are grieving and all who have been impacted by this tragedy. Over the weekend, the people of Minnesota and the nation have been watching closely as this case has unfolded. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension provided a detailed update yesterday, so I won't repeat those specifics. This was a targeted attack against individuals who answered the call to public service. The FBI's role in moments like this is clear: to stand alongside our partners, bring federal resources, intelligence capabilities, and reach to the effort, not just to apprehend the individual responsible, but to understand the full scope of the threat. That work continues. This case became the largest coordinated manhunt in Minnesota's history. We are proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with our law enforcement partners across the state. No single agency could have done this alone. And because of that unified effort, a dangerous individual was taken into custody. Let me say this clearly. Political violence has no place in this country. The FBI, alongside our partners, will remain focused on the work ahead and on ensuring justice is served. And with that, I'll hand it over to Drew.
Thank you with those comments, and we're thankful today to see these charges filed. Early on, with our partners from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and other federal partners from the ATF, United States Marshal Service, and others, they provided assistance to the team of local investigators from the Brooklyn Park Police Department, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, and the BCA that were working on this right to begin with, along with all the other hundreds of people that stepped up with the Champlain Police Department as well in this to pursue this justice. You might be asking, because we see a lot of times these cases, go in various orders when they are, but this is an indication that the United States Attorney's Office stands along with us in the state of Minnesota, that when somebody and an evil individual decides to move this and create fear in our communities and commit evil acts, that we will pursue every possible charge that we can, from the state charges that you've learned about today to these federal charges that were discussed early on. And I'm grateful for the leadership of the United States Attorney's Office and the FBI for helping us move that forward so quickly in a coordinated approach. We do that because, as SAC Winston said, in situations like this, we have individuals that step up to serve their communities. They are elected officials across our state, and when an individual chooses to target them for their role in representing all of us, It's an incumbent upon all of us to put all the resources forward to hold that individual accountable, to seek justice, and to make sure that we are working together to show the community across Minnesota and the United States that political violence is never okay. We as a country are formed on the basis that we have political discourse and that we have debates ongoing on what we do and that we elect people day in, day out to represent us. And when somebody tries to undermine that, it's important for all of us to hold that person accountable so that we can move forward as a country and have a system in place that a representative government and that we provide the protections for those individuals and their families moving forward. And so I'm thankful for these charges today to move this forward and the great work of the United States Attorney's Office partnering with us to move forward on this. And with that, they'll take some questions.
Why is there a terrorism charge in there?
Why is there not a terrorism charge is the question. You know, we brought the charges that we think are appropriate right now. Obviously, these crimes are about 48 hours old, so we have an ongoing investigation, and I can't comment as to what other charges may or may not be brought.
Will you seek the death penalty? Will you seek the death penalty?
Lou, thank you for the question. Will we see the death penalty? It's too early to tell. That is one of the options for several of the charges, though.
Did Mr. Boelter have any assistance? Are you looking into whether he may have had assistance? And if he did, what are the potential consequences for anybody who may have assisted him either before or after these tragic shootings?
Our investigation remains ongoing in several areas, including whether or not he had anyone helping him, assisting him in either carrying out these attacks or fleeing from them. I can't comment on that at this time. There's nothing in the complaint suggesting that someone did, but the investigation is ongoing. In fact, it's just in its infancy. It's been 48 hours, most of which we are primarily focused on finding him.
He was on surveillance cameras in Minneapolis shortly after these crimes occurred. Do we know how he got from Brooklyn Park to Minneapolis? Was it on foot?
I don't know the answer to that.
Can we just get clarity about the state charges concurrent with the federal charges? How does that all work? Does this make null the state charges or take precedence over the state charges?
It does not nullify the state charges. They remain in place. Today, he was brought into federal custody. He'll make his initial court appearance in federal court over in St. Paul at 1:30 Central Time this afternoon. And my expectation, based on prior cases, is the federal charges will be litigated first, but the state charges won't necessarily go anywhere.
Can you speak to why investigators believe he carried out this attack and for how long he may have been planning these attacks?
Well, it's pretty clear from the evidence that he's been planning these attacks for quite some time. There's voluminous writings, as you've seen in the reporting, that were found both in his car and his house about his planning, lists of names and individuals. In terms of the why, it's unclear.
Is he
About this interaction
cooperating
with the New Hope police. What had law enforcement been told at that point? Were they aware to be on the lookout for a dark SUV that resembled a police vehicle?
I don't know. I can turn that. I don't know if one of my colleagues here know. I know that they had heard about the shooting of Senator Hortman and being the diligent law enforcement they were, knowing that they had elected officials living in their communities, they went out to do a wellness check. I don't know more than that.
You know, what I can say, and as you can, I don't know the specifics of the question and what on that, whether it is. What I will tell you is that Hennepin County law enforcement working together at that time knew of that, and so as the different jurisdictions were on duty, some of them did proactive. You know, as you've heard from Chief Bruley on this in Maple Grove, for example, or in Brooklyn Park, for example, they went out proactively to check on the status and the well-being, and that's how we encountered this and prevented additional attacks, which we believe certainly could have occurred from occurring. So we don't know the specifics on the New Hope as to what they were doing, but they were tracking the shooting that happened, and so several of them were being proactive and checking on various people that they knew resided in their city.
So did he shoot at the officers in Brooklyn, or the Brooklyn Park officers that responded? Did he shoot at them, or was he shooting into the house and they kind of like chased him into the house?
My understanding is it's unclear at the moment whether or not he shot at them. It's possible that he did. It's not clear. Obviously, it was a chaotic scene.
And was he wearing the mask when the New Hope officer interacted with him?
I believe he was, although I can't say for certain.
Is there reason to believe that there was plans to commit additional violence at, say, the protests that were going on that day?
I've not seen evidence of that. It's hard to say what his plan was. Obviously, he went to the homes of no less than 4 elected officials. He had a list of other elected officials, their home addresses. So,
to make sure that we connect the dots properly, could you name the other 2 officials?
you know, we can't at this time. It wouldn't surprise me if they publicly identified themselves, but it's not really my place to do that if they want to protect their own privacy.
What's your message to Minnesotans who may get a late night knock on the door from police if something's going on in their communities? I mean, can you just speak on that?
I'm going to let law enforcement handle that one. I don't know if someone, sure, please.
Good morning, Police Chief Mark Bruley, Brooklyn Park Police Department. Great question. Like we sent out a message to our community when this first occurred is you always can call 911 and verify if the person at your door is a police officer. If they are a working police officer, they will be connected to a dispatch center that can validate that. So the first thing I would do is if you're concerned about it, is call 911. Obviously, there's a lot of different uniforms, and it's never wrong to do that.
Can you clarify the shooting stuff? Because we were told, I believe, that the person in custody did shoot at police at the Hortman residence. That's an important detail.
Yeah, so I'll answer this again. That's part of the active investigation, and I know there's been a lot that's going on, but as any time law enforcement uses deadly force, there's a walled-off separate investigation to examine that. At that time, I will tell you, we still work through. We are gathering evidence when we go through. This happened incredibly fast. What I can tell you is the police officers that were there on scene, that while they were assessing the situation, that the gunfire erupted. And we are still working through and reconstructing that crime scene. We've gathered all of the evidence related to that. And what was said there is that this is definitely happening very quickly. And we definitely know that he began shooting at the Hortmans, as will be detailed in this information, immediately once the officers were assessing the situation. Whether or not that the gunfire was returned at the officers or not, we are working through that, and we need to recreate the crime scene itself.
Can you identify the motive?
And I want to say, like, in that process, the gunfire was erupting in such a way all around that is partly why with the reasonable interpretation on some of those is where that came from initially.
Can you identify the potential motive here? It has been widely reported that the list, his hit list, contained names of people who are abortion rights supporters. And also, can you please release the names of the two other targeted victims who were fortunate to get away?
As I said, with respect to the other two potential victims, I think it's up to them whether they want to publicly identify themselves. As I said, it wouldn't surprise me if they do. They're elected officials, but that's their right. Obviously, they may have families and children and privacy interests that they need to sort through. So I'll let them do that. With respect to the potential motive, let me say this. There's been a lot of press coverage and speculation and discussion of a manifesto. I've seen nothing like a Unabomber-style manifesto in his writings. He had many, many notebooks full of plans, lists of names, surveillance, efforts that he took to surveil and locate the home addresses and family members' relationships with these elected officials. But I have not seen anything involving some sort of political screed or manifesto that would clearly identify what motivated him. Obviously, his primary motive was to go out and murder people. Now, they were all elected officials. They were all Democrats. Beyond that, I think it's just way too speculative for anyone that's reviewed these materials to know and to say what was motivating him in terms of ideology or specific issues. There's a lot of...
For abortion rights supporters?
There were some abortion rights supporters, I believe, on the list. But again, there was dozens and dozens and dozens of names on, hundreds of pages of documents that were recovered with his writings on them.
Did he confess and give more details after he was apprehended last night?
I'm not going to comment on that at this time.
Can you talk about how long this creep planning and surveillance went on? Do you have any idea?
It appears to have gone on for an extensive period of time. I think it's unclear. The writings appear to have been done at various times over the course of at least months, I would say. But beyond that, it's speculative.
Did he have there's kind of two questions that go towards the same thing. He appeared to be involved with some kind of a home security or professional security operation. I wonder if you have any details into that. And was he familiar to law enforcement, even though he didn't appear to have any kind of serious criminal record in the state?
I've seen the press reporting on his security company. I don't know anything beyond that or any involvement that would have in this case. And I have no knowledge of his interactions with law enforcement prior to this.
Can you comment at all about, his car, the light pack, the license plate, maybe a bit of a badge sniffer? Was he obsessed with police?
I have no idea. I think I skipped over the slide. The police license plate wasn't an official-looking police license plate, as you can tell. It said, I believe it was like a reflective black things that you would buy to put on like a mailbox, like your address on a mailbox.
Was he a bit obsessed with do we know?
I have no idea.
There have been reports that his wife was quote, detained at a rest stop in Onamia, and that in her car was found weapons, passports, and a lot of cash. She was also with 3 children. Is that true? And is the wife being investigated?
Go ahead. I'll defer to law enforcement on that one.
Yeah, I can answer the question. So when, the question was detained, obviously, when an individual commits these, heinous acts and we knew he was the suspect in this case, we're going to want to talk to the family. At this point in time, this is, under active prosecution, and so we want to be careful about what we say. She was cooperative with us at that time. There were a firearm in the vehicle at the time. Had valid reasons for her she was legally in possession, I should say that, at this time, and there were other items that were recovered, but we're going to leave that to some of the prosecution as we work this out. So we're not going to comment on all of it, as this is still continue to be part of the active investigation. We need to figure out exactly what all of this means in relation to this.
To be clear, there's not going to be a first appearance in district court then today, and then where is he being held?
There will be an initial appearance in federal court over in St. Paul, Minnesota at 1:30 Central Time this afternoon. I do not anticipate there will be an appearance in state court today.
Just one more question on the hit list. You said 45 names, and we've seen more than that. Was there more than 45?
There's lots of, go.
Yeah, and I think it can help. There's a lot of names that we're working together right now. So the FBI, there are some, and we've mentioned this, that there are some other names that are from out of state. They have been working through through our Fusion Center network across the United States, and then our partners at the FBI are helping coordinate with that in that process. The question is a good one. Part of what we're looking through, the names, the numbers that you're referencing, was names in multiple notebooks. Some of them are redundant. So I don't have a total number of people that were in there because some of them are overlapping on multiple lists. And again, I do want to continue to clarify, this is not a list of people that was in a numerical order and some sort of ranking. These are names that are being developed as we are looking at this across multiple writings in terms of that, just to be clear about it.
And was Sarah Hoffman's name even in there, though?
I believe it was.
Okay. Where is he being held?
Right now, I think he's in the custody of the United States Marshal Service over at the St. Paul Federal Courthouse. Beyond that, I'll defer to the marshals on where he'll be held, assuming he's held in custody pending trial.
Can today's court appearance be considered an arraignment? Is there anything you can tell about what's supposed to happen today?
It'll be an initial appearance because he's only charged by complaint. He has not yet been indicted. So he'll have an initial appearance, as all defendants do, before a federal judge, where he'll be asked to identify himself. The court will appoint a lawyer to represent him, or he can retain one and have a lawyer represent him. And then the court will ask whether or not we will move to seek his detention pending trial, which we obviously will. And then the court could set a detention hearing and a preliminary hearing to assess whether or not there's probable cause to charge him by complaint. How much of that will happen actually today is unclear. We'll see at 1:30.
It's at the Warren E. Berger Federal Building, and that's the only court appearance today?
Correct.
Thank you.
And for Superintendent Evans, yesterday, the way that things played out yesterday, when you came up for the 5:30 or so press conference, did you know that he was close to being caught at that point? Or did it come as a surprise when you got the trail cam information or from a neighbor who saw him in the field?
So that, we, as noted, we still had belief that he was in Sibley County. When we held that, we did not know the information specifically that he was there. Based on the overall investigative, that was still our belief there, but the specific information that led to his arrest at that time, we were not tracking yet. So, and I assume that's related to the timeline. These teams and the law enforcement teams acted very quickly when they had a specific lead that led us to know he was in that area. And so it was a relatively short period of time where they converged and were able to do that.
What we knew before this news conference was bad enough.
What you have told us is even worse. Where does this rank in terms of attacks that you know of across the United States? And what you addressed some of your reaction, but can you all three give us your reaction?
Look, this was a political assassination, which is not a word we use very often in the United States, let alone here in Minnesota. It's a chilling attack on our democracy, on our way of life. It's only the most recent example of violent political extremism in this country, and that's a trend that's been increasing in recent years, and that's unfortunate. And I hope it's a wake-up call to everyone that people can disagree with you without being evil or needing to be killed or hurt.
You mentioned that multiple different aspects of this investigation were found in multiple different notebooks. How many were discovered, and were they all in his vehicle?
My understanding is some notebooks were recovered from his vehicle and others from his house, although obviously there was law enforcement literally from all around the state. I couldn't begin to identify all of them. Representatives of many of those, or some of those agencies are here, but far more were involved. And so all I can say, there was many notebooks recovered from multiple locations. And part of it's
makes sense about him going back home. Like, what was he thinking? Did he say he was trying to get back to his house? I mean, it's odd, I guess you could say.
I can't speculate as to what was in his mind. He obviously went on a murderous rampage on Friday, so I think I'm not aligned with his thought process.
Mr. Winston, can you talk about, is there any sort of attention being paid to what kind of safety needs to be given to politicians at this time, or is this a space where people feel like any threat has left with this threat?
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to, of course, take these threats as serious as possible and throw all available resources towards these threats. We are in lockstep with the Capitol Police on a regular basis, and we're continuing to have those conversations about threats towards politicians. Thank you for that question.
Maybe one more question here before we wrap up.
Perhaps this is for Chief Broley. Just wanted to wrap it back to hoping you can speak to just how pivotal it is that your officers acted proactively, stopping by the Hortman's house and likely stopping more victims.
Yeah, great question. Just for everybody in the room, question is, how important was it that the police officer stopped at Representative Hortman's house, which really foiled this entire plan? It's incredibly important. That started with a sergeant who was actually off duty, was walking out of the building and had heard that there was a shooting in another community at Senator Hoffman's house. Being alert, seen two officers in the police department, said, hey, drive by Melissa Hortman's house and just check on the house, would you? And that's essentially what they pulled up and found, that in the driveway was the car. And essentially, the criminal act was occurring as they pulled up. Had they not foiled the plan, essentially took his vehicle away from him, which involved all his maps, all his names, all his weaponry, I would be very scared what it would look like over the next few hours had we not done that.
And just to clarify, did your sergeant know about the New Hope and Maple Grove incidents, or just the one in Champlin?
He only knew about the one that occurred in Champlin.
So the other officer that came upon him at the second house and saw him sitting in a vehicle, did she realize, did she report that, and did they try to chase him? Did she realize that was suspect, or?
I don't think she did. She knew something was awry, and then he left and proceeded to Brooklyn Park and carried out the next shooting, so got lost in the chaos of the event. Not lost in the chaos of the events, but there was a new shooting shortly thereafter. It really is remarkable, to the question earlier, how he went to 4 houses that night, and in 2 of them, he encountered law enforcement at the third and fourth one, and the second one, no one was home at all. It's remarkable how diligent law enforcement was at 2:30, 3 o'clock, and 3:30 in the morning on a Friday night, that they were responding to just to do wellness checks on our politicians. It's a testament. The last 48 hours have been an incredible testament to the professionalism and dedication and commitment of our federal, state, and local law enforcement. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Governor Newsom is speaking right now after a federal judge ruled against the Trump administration, ordering Trump to return control of the National Guard to Newsom. Let's listen.
Those cornerstones.
Now, break.
Well, in just over an hour, Vance Belter will make his first court appearance. He's being held on $5 million bond and faces 2 counts of stalking, 2 counts of murder, and 2 other firearms charges. This is how a U.S. attorney described the planning and the preparation behind those horrific attacks.
It is no exaggeration to say that his crimes are the stuff of nightmares. Boelter stalked his victims like prey. He went to their homes, held them out as a police officer, and shot them in cold blood.
Joining me now, civil rights attorney, former Brooklyn prosecutor, and MSNBC legal analyst Charles Coleman. Charles, you don't get more pointed or specific than what we heard there. What do we expect to happen at today's hearing once it moves into the courtroom?
Well, once we get into the courtroom, we're going to have the actual indictment unformally, it's not sealed, so it will be read before the court. And then the judge will make a determination as to the next steps around bail, which will likely not be set. This person will be remain in custody. And then there will be additional dates set for discovery and moving closer toward trial. So that's what we're going to have. There shouldn't be many surprises. What we know from the indictment is likely going to be everything that's discussed in court. And then the judge from there is just going to say, no bail, keep moving, take charge, and then set dates to move things along.
You mentioned that this is not going to be sealed, so we'll get more information, but it struck me and Tom Winter as we sat here and watched the press conference last hour, the level of detail that they went into 4 separate homes, at least, that the alleged shooter went to. And I also want to play what the U.S. Attorney had to say about writings that they found at various locations. Take a listen to that.
I've seen nothing like a Unabomber-style manifesto in his writings. He had many, many notebooks full of plans, lists of names, surveillance, efforts that he took to surveil and locate the home addresses and family members' relationships with these elected officials. But I have not seen anything involving some sort of political screed or manifesto that would clearly identify what motivated him. Obviously, his primary motive was to go out and murder people. Now, they were all elected officials. They were all Democrats. Beyond that, I think it's just way too speculative for anyone that's reviewed these materials to know and to say what was motivating him in terms of ideology.
What motivated him? There was an interview with the man who described himself as a close friend, one of his housemates, who said that he never saw or heard anything that would suggest that this was the person he knew. But do you need a motive in a case like this?
You don't. And for as interesting as that might be to the narrative around the motive in the political narrative, if you will, that's not necessary for a conviction here. I think, Chris, one of the most important pieces of the indictment are the stalking charges, because the stalking charges talk about the preparation that went into committing this crime. And ultimately, when you pair on a federal level with respect to the federal charges, not the state ones, the stalking charge with the murder, what you do is you give yourself as a prosecutor an opportunity where the sentence, the ultimate sentence, could be life in prison. And so because you have basically 4 sets of these, 2 stalking, 2 murders, that combination, if convicted, will almost certainly mean that this individual is behind bars for the rest of their days.
Okay, so let me ask you to put on the hat of a defense attorney. What do you do? Where do you start? We don't know anything. It's likely someone will be appointed for him. We have no indication that he's independently wealthy and will hire a big team. But whatever happens, where do you go as a defense attorney? Where do you start?
The best case that you have is to try and poke holes into the procedural issues regarding the case. And what I mean by that is the investigation. The more people that put their hands on the investigation, the different law enforcement agencies that were involved, creates potential for some room to be had to argue paperwork and admissibility. And so if you can keep, for example, that journal from getting out, if you can keep, for example, some of the identifications from getting in, then maybe you stand a chance of potentially creating reasonable doubt or a mistrial, or at least a weaker case for the prosecution. It does not seem that way, because what we are learning from the investigation, what we're learning from the U.S. Attorney's Office, seems to be ironclad. But keep in mind that a jury is not necessarily going to have all of that information at trial. So if you're a defense attorney, you're trying to see procedurally, are there any weaknesses that I might be able to tap into that can perhaps give my client an opportunity for an acquittal?
Charles Coleman Jr., it's good to see you. Thank you. In chilling detail.
All right, well, let's head in. This is in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the U.S. Attorney. Let's listen in.
But the details of Boelter's crime are even worse. They are truly chilling. It is no exaggeration to say that his crimes are the stuff of nightmares.
I want to bring in Minnesota Democratic State Representative Sidney Jordan, a colleague of Representative Melissa Hortman, who sat next to her as they served together in the State House. Thank you for joining us. I know this is an incredibly emotional time for you. How are you, and does this arrest at least give you any sense of relief?
Yes, thank you.
I would say that I am safe, but I don't know that I'm okay. I don't know that any of my colleagues are going to be okay for some time. It is a relief to know that the person who allegedly did this is not out there thinking about this, but it's a lot to take in.
We did just learn in this news conference, and I don't know how much of it you were able to listen to, that the suspect is accused of stalking and conducting surveillance on the victims. He actually visited at least 4 homes that night. Can you even process what was going on here?
Unfortunately, in my capacity as a legislator, this is not being stalked and receive threats. Many of my colleagues have in the past, but this is obviously one of the first times this has happened. It's hard to contemplate the idea of being watched in this manner. You know, we are highly visible, extroverted community members to be legislators. You know, my community, my neighbors on my block made sure that my home was being watched for me, but this is a lot to take in terms of what exactly was going through the mind of this person when he went through and targeted legislators like this. It's just so heartbreaking what happened to Speaker Hortman and Mark Hortman.
What would you like people to know about what was lost with Melissa Hortman, what it means to you personally, professionally, and also what she meant to the state, her service to her community and her state?
I think if you can think of something that came out of a law in Minnesota, whether it's the bus you ride to work or the street you drive on to work, the meal, the breakfast, the lunch your child receives at school for free, the time off you receive to care for your friends or loved one, if you see a solar panel in the state of Minnesota, it's because of Melissa Hortman. She advocated for planting trees across our state because we know that we need trees to combat climate change, to make sure that people have what they need to keep their homes cool. But she also just loved trees, and she loved gardening, and she loved the outdoors. Melissa Hortman made your life better in Minnesota. Melissa was the kind of person who would tell us to do things like take off your blue jerseys and your red jerseys when you go to work and be a human. And Melissa made it so that we could govern the state of Minnesota so effectively over the past couple of years. She was a fierce negotiator, but she was a good friend. She was funny. She liked to have fun. And we've all lost just a giant, just an incredible person. And we also lost Mark Hortman, who was also just one of the sweetest, kindest people, who loved Melissa so much and was so proud of the work she was doing in St. Paul.
We are very sorry for your loss, for your personal loss, for the loss in the state of a dedicated public servant. Minnesota State Representative Sidney Jordan, it is a tribute to her and a tribute to you that you came on today and shared with us your experience and your feelings. So thank you.
Thank you.
Joining us now, NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster, NBC News national law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, and retired FBI agent and criminal profiler and current director for the Forensic Science Program at George Mason University, Mary Ellen O'Toole. All right, Tom, I'm going to start with you. It was a long news conference today from both state and federal law enforcement. What did we find out?
Incredibly detailed press conference, incredibly detailed charging complaint that we got with this, Katie, over 20 pages. And what it points out in what they said at the press conference, what the court documents appear to clearly show, the allegations against this individual, now 6 counts, including on the murder charges that we're looking at there on screen. Those are death penalty eligible charges. But what has been painted in the court paperwork is that this could have been a lot worse. If local law enforcement had not immediately reacted by sending officers to other houses of those that were lawmakers in their area, that this individual could have kept going through the night because he apparently had, according to the acting U.S. attorney, dozens of names in the course of his notebooks that they found in the car By the way, in the car, they also found several assault-type rifles. They found an additional handgun. We have images of it. It's seen in there. And what he was doing, according to the notes, and this leads to us to two of the counts, which are the stalking counts, he was online on all these various people finder websites looking up information, including county and various municipality websites, looking up information on these state lawmakers. There is not something in there, according to the acting U.S. attorney, that is something like a screed or a manifesto where this individual would say, oh, I did it because of X, and this is why I did that. There's not something that quite spells that out. Did confirm that a number of the individuals on the list, or at least names that appeared in the writings, were those that had pro-choice views when it comes to abortion, or espoused those views. So we did get some clarification on that. It was several dozen names that were on there. But very clearly, this individual had a plan, was out there to do a significant amount of damage. And if law enforcement hadn't uncovered him on the fourth location that he went to, where he was actively involved in a shooting, the two that you mentioned were miraculously going to recover, who knows how long this
How did they get
for.
on the case so quickly?
So the initial shooting happens. They see that it's a homicide. The daughter of the two deceased calls 911. According to the acting U.S. attorney in the charging documents, apparently Boelter gets to the front door and says, it's police. He's got the flashing lights on the car. He's shining the light in their faces. He's wearing this silicone mask. You're looking at it right there in one of the images. And so they say to him, you're not police. What are you talking about? He says, well, I'm here to conduct a robbery. So his story changes. Then they try to stop him from coming into the home. He starts firing at them. The daughter is home at the house, calls 911. So immediately she can tell them what is going on. Obviously, they understand that this is a state lawmaker. And through quick thinking by local law enforcement, they say, you know what? If this guy in the middle of the night is trying to impersonate a police officer, showing at the home of a state lawmaker and firing, perhaps other state lawmakers' lives could be in jeopardy. And that's how they start getting on the case. It appears that a majority of the incident is captured on a Ring camera or some sort of a doorbell camera there at the residence.
Do we know anything about the other houses that he went to, who those lawmakers were, what happened there?
It's spelled out in the complaint. Just the quick story on that is at the second location, the state lawmaker was not home. They were on vacation.
Lucky.
The third one, police show up there. He's there sitting in his car. They start to ask him questions. He then kind of takes off from that location. And so, if you see somebody dressed as a police officer, they're there, they're not talking to you, they leave, they go to investigate the house, but he was never able to actually get to that address.
And so what do we know? I know there wasn't a manifesto. It's what lawmaker officers or law enforcement was saying, that they didn't have a clear manifesto. You just laid that out as well. But do we know anything about his personal political convictions? Because they are also calling this politically motivated.
They are calling it politically motivated. They call it a flat-out political assassination. That's what they said at the press conference. Yeah, so, he's got a history, apparently, of being somebody who's more conservative. That's his background. That's where he comes from, according to those that say that they know him, that have spoken out about his background and his history. So that's what we know about him. Specifically, though, as I said, he's not being charged with anything ideological here. So they're not charging him with the domestic terrorism. They're not charging him with any sort of a crime that speaks to something. But you can call it a political assassination because all he was going after were state lawmakers. So clearly this has a political component to it. He didn't choose these people at random.
And I'm sorry to keep on you, but I have one more. I mentioned first-degree murder charges in the open, but officially it's second-degree murder charges. What are they waiting for first degree?
Right. So there's been a little bit of a change up there, and I want to address that. Initially, the state charged him with second-degree murder charges. That was just a holding charge. What they can do when that happened on Saturday, Katie, is they can issue an interstate all-state warrant, basically saying anybody that picks this guy up, if he was in Chicago and your local Chicago Police Department officer and you pull this guy over, you can detain him right there because he's got a out-of-state warrant that's available to grab him. That's what they wanted to do. Since they didn't know where he was, they wanted to give every other state in the country and federal law enforcement the opportunity to detain him. This morning, they charged him on the state side with first-degree murder. The federal system, that first, second degree doesn't really apply. They've charged him with a homicide charge. 2 of those counts are death penalty eligible.
Got it. So, Mary Ellen, let's talk about how he was able to find these lawmakers. They have their addresses listed publicly. A lot of public officials or public faces have their addresses online. It's something that you can get through open source reporting. It's through, your bills that get sent to your home, whatever. Is that something this country needs to reconsider, whether it is a smart idea for everybody to be able to access the personal information of others on a database online?
Well, I don't know how you really get away from that, though, 100%. I think some information is just out there, and it's going to be accessible to people that want to really work hard and find it. But I will add something on that may make this even a more concerning situation. When I was in the BAU, we called it predatory behavior a lot. And predatory behavior is really defined as hunting human being behavior. I would not be surprised, and I'm assuming that they will be looking at this. This individual was probably not just looking for addresses. He probably took advantage of some situations where he could meet the person in person, maybe at a political event, and actually shake their hand. That would give him a lot of pleasure to know I'm going to kill you in the next week or two. So I think there could have been some personal meetings that he had with these people that had no idea that they were on some kind of a hit list created by him.
How does the FBI prevent this? How do they find people before they take action?
Well, to me, as I listened to the press conference today, it does seem to me, anyway, that this kind of behavior resulted in what we call leakage, which is to at least announce ahead of time and maybe in covert ways what their intentions were, whether it was to a friend or to a family member. And I can tell you that leakage has been prominent in mass shootings and in other events similar to this. And I cannot underscore enough how much leakage behavior becomes imperative that people come forward to law enforcement and advise them what's going on. And I know people don't want to rat out their family members. They love them. But unfortunately, when there is leakage combined with access to weapons, combined with this enjoyment of dress rehearsals, which is probably playing a prominent role in this, getting dressed up, deciding on what you're going to wear the night you go out to commit these murders, all that's leakage that has to come to the attention of law enforcement so that they can prevent it.
What is the conversation like between investigators and his family right now?
Well, they're going to be, I think, very considerate of the family because they need their cooperation. They need them to feel as though that they can get as complete of information as possible. Again, if they put them on guard, if they're hostile towards family members, law enforcement knows they won't get anything. Because I will tell you over and over again, we said this every day in the FBI, and it's true. It's applicable to all of us. Blood is thicker than water. And to get a family member to come forward, especially now that you're looking at a death penalty case, is extremely difficult. They love this man. They do. And so law enforcement has to tread very lightly, and they have to develop a relationship with family members, even friends, to tell them, look, this is serious. And not only in this case, but we have to be concerned about other people that are inspired by what they saw your father do or your best friend do. So we really need help.
I'm hoping that you can help people generally understand the moment that we're in, because it's scary and it's concerning. We've seen an uptick in political violence. How is law enforcement looking at this moment? What are the factors that are concerning them?
I would say there's several factors, and law enforcement for many years, for the past 25 plus years, we've been aware of how current cases like this, starting with Columbine, how they have influenced future offenders. We've known that. And at this point, this kind of behavior being influenced by what you can learn and read about on the internet has really become metastasized. So there's no one single solution. Law enforcement knows that. Law enforcement is big on these warning behaviors, this leakage kind of behavior that I've talked with you about. So I think, number one, I think that is probably the most important message that law enforcement really considers. And that's really a big part of the training that we have in law enforcement, is to be able to recognize this behavior. The other thing that law enforcement is very much aware of, and yet I still hear it used incorrectly by the public, is that this is not behavior that is the result of somebody having just snapped. This list, these writings have been probably put together over a period of at least months, if not longer. So this person has really evolved over time in thinking about what they're going to do. So there is months in the planning. Law enforcement knows that as well. This is not a matter of snapping behavior. And words like snapping and evil, this person is a monster, they're not helpful at all because they give a misconception about who these individuals are. This is cold-blooded, number one, very well planned out, and predatory in its nature. And those all add up to what we saw happen over the weekend that resulted in 2 homicides and 2 attempted homicides.
My name is Joe Thompson, and I'm the acting United States Attorney for the District of Minnesota. Late last night, the U.S. Attorney's Office filed a complaint bringing an array of federal charges against Vance Boelter for his horrific attack on our state and our elected representatives. Political assassinations are rare. They strike at the very core of our democracy. But the details of Boelter's crime are even worse. They are truly chilling. It is no exaggeration to say that his crimes are the stuff of nightmares. Boelter stalked his victims like prey. He went to their homes, held them out as a police officer, and shot them in cold blood. Now, there's been a lot of information and misinformation out there about Boelter's crimes. We have filed a detailed 20-page complaint and affidavit that sets forth what happened in this case. I'd like to share some of that information with you now. In the early morning hours of June 14th, Boelter went to the homes of 4 Minnesota state politicians.
The suspect accused of shooting 2 Minnesota state lawmakers and their spouses is set to make his first appearance in federal court. 57-year-old Vance Boelter is facing 6 federal charges, including 2 counts of murder with a firearm. He's also facing state murder charges. Boelter was arrested in the woods on Sunday night after a 43-hour manhunt. The 2 lawmakers who were shot allegedly by Boelter were both Democrats. They were shot in their own homes. Authorities revealed in a news conference not long ago that Boelter actually went to the homes of 2 other politicians with, quote, the intent to kill them. CNN's Danny Freeman is in Minneapolis. Danny, what's the latest that you're learning?
Brianna, the acting U.S. attorney here in Minneapolis called these crimes the stuff of nightmares. Now, you said it just a moment ago that we're expecting to see the suspect here, 57-year-old Vance Boelter, in federal court in just under a half hour or so. That's going to be actually in St. Paul in the Twin City. But here's the thing, Brianna. While we know that he's going to face 6 federal charges there to start, that's including murder, that's including stalking, that's including firearm offenses, as you noted, the most shocking thing that we learned when this federal criminal complaint was unsealed and that press conference occurred is that Boelter allegedly went to 2 other homes, targeting 4 Minnesota state lawmakers early in the morning hours on Saturday. So the first home that he went to, according to authorities, was the home of State Senator John Hortman. And I just want you to take a listen to how the acting U.S. attorney framed that moment where Boelter approached the door of their home, dressed in tactical gear, dressed in a silicone mask, and presented himself falsely as a police officer.
When they opened the door, Boelter shined the flashlight in their faces and said there had been a shooting reported in the house. Boelter asked if they had any weapons. When Boelter lowered his flashlight, which he had shined in their face, they realized that he was not a police officer. They shouted out, "You're not a cop. You're not a police officer." Boelter then announced, "This is a robbery," and forced himself into their home. When Senator Hortman attempted to push Boelter out and stop him from entering his home, Boelter shot him repeatedly. Boelter then shot Miss Hortman repeatedly.
But Boelter allegedly did not stop there. After that shooting, he then, according to these U.S. officials, went to a second lawmaker's house, but that lawmaker was not home. So he then moved on to a third lawmaker's house. But at this point of the evening, police were already aware that there had been a shooting. So a number of local law enforcement officers actually spread out to, now we know, a number of local lawmakers' homes. It seemed at that point that Boelter was scared off from the third home, his third intended victim, but he was then able to allegedly get to State Representative Melissa Hortman's home, where he ultimately killed her and her husband, Mark. Now, I just want to add one quick thing. Something we learned here also, that during the then flurry manhunt that took about 43 hours searching for Boelter, Boelter allegedly texted his family members, saying in this text, this is from the criminal complaint, "Dad went to war last night. I don't want to say more because I don't want to implicate anyone." Again, so many frightening details here about this story. Again, that court appearance coming within the hour. Brianna?
Oh, Danny Freeman, thank you so much for that report. Boris?
We're joined now by CNN law enforcement analyst Jonathan Wackrow. Jonathan, thanks for being with us. Stepping back, I wonder what kind of security, if any, do state officials and their spouses typically have?
Well, typically their own personal safety is their own responsibility, unless it's there's a direct threat or a veiled threat that has been lodged against them, or if there's some moment of a critical event. So it actually speaks to the vulnerability that our lawmakers have, that our politicians, our elected officials have, that they face a variety of domestic threats day in and day out. We're seeing this rise of political violence. And acting U.S. Attorney Thompson said that earlier today, that he wanted to make it very clear that this was an act of political assassination. And he also acknowledged the rise of political extremism across our country. With that, Boris, that actually necessitates both state and federal lawmakers to bolster their own security structure around them, mindful of this rising threat that they now face.
Do you still worry, even though he's in custody, about the safety of the people that he reportedly targeted in his writings, including some prominent Democrats and abortion rights advocates?
I do, and here's why. This was not an impulsive, crime. This was very well thought out. It was ideologically driven, and because of that, my fear is that someone else will pick up the mantle and try to continue on whatever mission that he was trying to, or goal that he was trying to attain. So again, while this individual is in custody, lawmakers are trying to work very quickly. And we heard that during this press conference that, they were hesitant to say whether or not anyone else was involved. Why? Because this is an ongoing investigation, but they need to quickly assess whether or not this individual was working in conjunction with people to support his actions, or is this part of a broader ideological group that he is part of that he just launched this attack on behalf of. So again, lawmakers are at risk every single day, and I do worry about copycat attacks or repeat attacks. We have seen acts of political violence on the rise across the United States, so this is a big concern right now.
To that point, Leader Hakeem Jeffries is meeting with a bipartisan group of congressional leadership to talk about heightened security for lawmakers. What do you think public officials and those protecting them need to be doing right now?
Well, it all comes down to a level of protective intelligence and situational awareness. We know that this individual, again, in this case, this was not, an impulsive act. This was a long drawn out, well-planned, very calculated set of events that he put into play. And really what it speaks to, Boris, is this textbook pathway to violence, where we have people who have grievances towards each other. They have violent ideations. They research the type of attack that they want to undertake, and then they prepare for it. Again, when we look back at this incident, it is a textbook pathway to violence. Mindful of that, lawmakers, working with local, state, and federal law enforcement officials, need to understand how do they pick up on the early warning behavioral anomalies of individuals, whether they're veiled threats or direct threats against them, and put the appropriate control measures in place. It's not an easy task. It is not without cost, but we know what the ultimate cost is when our lawmakers lose their lives. So this is a necessity right now to bolster the personal security of our elected officials, both at their offices as well as at their personal residences, because we see the consequences.
Wow, a lot of information coming out of that press conference tonight. We learned some stunning new details about how they captured the suspect, Vance Boelter. And I have to say, some of the things that stuck out to me.
There's a two-letter word that Donald.